There are moments in life that divide your entire existence into two clean halves, the person you were before and the person you become after. I didn't know it at the time, but the night Marcus fell asleep on my shoulder was one of those moments. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud. There was no thunder cracking across the sky, no swelling orchestral music rising in the background. There was only the low blue glow of the television, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the smell of his shampoo, something cedar and clean, and the slow, almost imperceptible weight of his head drifting sideways until it came to rest against my shoulder like it had always belonged there. I stopped breathing. Not for a second, not for two. I stopped breathing for what felt like the entire length of a human lifetime. My lungs just forgot. My whole body forgot what it was supposed to be doing because every single nerve ending I had was focused on that one point of contact between his head and my shoulder. That one warm, heavy, completely accidental point of contact. The movie was still playing. Some action film Marcus had picked. I couldn't have told you the title if my life depended on it. There were explosions on the screen, car chases, someone shouting dialogue in a voice designed to sound important. None of it registered. The only thing that registered was the soft exhale of breath against the side of my neck, and the feeling that somehow, the universe had just shifted 3 degrees off its axis, and nothing was ever going to be quite straight again. My name is Daniel Reeves. I was 24 years old. My roommate's name was Marcus Cole. He was 26. And according to every single thing he had ever said, every story he had ever told, every woman he had ever pointed out on the street with that low, appreciative whistle and that easy grin, Marcus Cole was completely, totally, 100% straight. I had been telling myself that mattered for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. Not that I was counting. Let me back up. Let me go all the way back to the beginning because this story doesn't make sense if you only see the ending. And trust me, there is an ending. But the ending only means something if you understand where we started: 2 strangers in a hallway, a shared apartment, and a friendship that neither of us had any idea was quietly, slowly, irrevocably changing everything about who we were. It started with a Craigslist ad. I know what you're thinking, but hear me out. I had been living in Austin for 8 months before I met Marcus, and in those 8 months I had gone through 2 roommates so forgettable I've genuinely lost their names. One brief, catastrophic attempt at living alone that ended when I realized I couldn't afford to keep the electricity on, and a 3-week stretch of sleeping on my friend Priya's couch that I will never, under any circumstances, speak about in detail. The point is, I needed a roommate badly, and I was not in a position to be particular. I posted an ad: 2-bedroom apartment in East Austin, decent square footage, close to a bus line, affordable if you split it. Looking for someone clean, responsible, employed, and ideally capable of having a conversation that extended beyond asking whose turn it was to buy dish soap. I got 14 responses. 12 of them I eliminated immediately for reasons I won't go into. One of them I met for coffee, decided was probably fine, and then never heard from again. The 14th was Marcus. He didn't respond to the ad the way the others did. Most people sent a paragraph about themselves, their job, their schedule, maybe a line about how they were clean and quiet and wouldn't be a problem. Marcus sent me 3 sentences. Hey, saw your ad. I'm a personal trainer. I work early mornings and I'm usually in bed by 10. I don't throw parties, I don't steal food, and I'll actually replace the toilet paper when it runs out. Let me know if you want to meet. That was it. No elaborate sell job, no list of references, just 3 sentences and the quiet confidence of someone who knew that was enough. I don't know why I said yes, or maybe I do. Maybe it was the toilet paper line. Maybe it was the absence of the word chill. Every single other person who had contacted me had described themselves as super chill, and by that point the word had started to make my eye twitch. Whatever the reason, I told him to come by on a Thursday evening, and at exactly 7 o'clock, not 7:03, not 6:58, but 7 on the dot, there was a knock at my door. I opened it and there was Marcus. And here is where I have to be honest with you because this is a true story and it deserves honesty. The first thing I thought when I saw Marcus Cole standing in my doorway was not anything appropriate or measured or reasonable. The first thing I thought was, oh no. He was tall, 6'1", maybe 6'2", the kind of build that comes from actually working out rather than just being casually athletic, wide shoulders, arms that filled out the sleeves of his gray t-shirt, a jaw that looked like it had been designed by someone who took their job very seriously. He had dark brown skin and eyes that were almost black in the hallway light, and when he smiled, which he did immediately, a wide, easy, completely unself-conscious smile, he had a dimple on his left cheek that I'm pretty sure was illegal in at least 3 states. "Daniel," he said, holding out a hand. "Yeah," I said, "Marcus. That's me." We shook hands. His grip was firm without being performative about it. He had calluses on his palms from lifting weights. I stepped back and let him in, and I spent the next 45 minutes showing him the apartment, discussing rent and utilities and house rules, maintaining what I was extremely proud of as a perfectly normal, professional, unremarkable level of composure. And then he left, and I closed the door, and I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and said out loud to absolutely no one, "You are not doing this." I want to be clear about something. I have known I was gay since I was 16 years old. I came out to my parents at 18. My mom cried happy tears. My dad hugged me for a long time and said he already knew, which was both touching and slightly embarrassing. I came out to my friends in college without much fanfare. I had dated a few men, nothing serious but nothing shameful either. I was not confused about who I was or what I wanted. What I was at 24, living in a new city with no real social network to speak of, doing a job that kept me largely isolated in my apartment, was lonely. Loneliness does things to your judgment. It makes people seem brighter, warmer, more significant than they might otherwise appear. It makes a smile feel like a gift and a kind word feel like a lifeline. It makes you read too much into small things. I knew this about myself. I told myself I knew this about myself. I told myself that what I felt when I looked at Marcus was physical, manageable, and completely beside the point, because even in the best-case scenario, this man was going to be my roommate. And you do not date your roommate, you do not fall for your roommate. You do not, under any circumstances, allow the loneliness inside you to reach out and attach itself to the most convenient warm body that happens to be sharing your square footage. I gave myself that entire speech. And then Marcus moved in the following Saturday, and within 6 hours I had already broken the first rule by thinking he had the best laugh I had ever heard in my life. Here is the thing no one tells you about living with someone you're attracted to. The attraction is actually the easy part. The attraction you can manage. You can suppress it, redirect it, remind yourself of all the reasons it's impossible, build walls around it, and tell yourself the walls are strong. You've done it before, you know how. What you can't manage, what no amount of self-discipline or self-awareness can protect you from, is the friendship. Because Marcus Cole, as it turned out, was exactly the kind of person I would have chosen as a friend, even if he had looked like a completely average human being. Even if my heart hadn't done something embarrassing every time he walked through the front door smelling like cedar and clean sweat. Even if his laugh hadn't been that particular laugh, low and genuine, the kind that doesn't perform itself, the kind that tells you the person is actually delighted by something rather than just going through the motions of being delighted. He was funny, not in a trying too hard way, not in a loud filling the room way, but in a quiet, dry, slightly observational way that I consistently did not see coming and consistently found devastating. He would say something so perfectly timed, so precisely calibrated, that I would still be thinking about it 3 hours later. He read books, real ones, novels and history and the occasional philosophy, and he had opinions about them that were more interesting than most people I'd met with twice his education. He was curious about things, he would ask follow-up questions, he actually listened to the answers. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how rare it is to live with someone and have them actually listen when you talk? Within 2 months, Marcus was my best friend. Within 3 months, he was probably the best friend I had ever had. Within 4 months, I was in serious trouble and I knew it, and I did what I always do when I know something and don't want to deal with it. I filed it away and pretended it wasn't there. Our routines settled into themselves naturally, the way water finds the shape of whatever it's poured into. Marcus woke at 5, ran, worked at the gym until early afternoon, came home. I woke at 7:30, worked at my desk, emerged for coffee, worked some more. We'd overlap in the evenings, dinner sometimes, television sometimes, just existing in the same space the way comfortable people exist together, not needing to fill every silence, not needing to perform. We had a standing Tuesday tradition that started entirely by accident. Marcus came home one evening with Thai food for two, set it on the coffee table, turned on a documentary he'd read about and said, "You eaten?" And when I said no, he said good and handed me chopsticks. That was it. That was the whole origin story of Tuesday night. No discussion, no formal agreement, just a thing that happened once and then kept happening because it was good and neither of us saw any reason to stop it. He learned how I took my coffee, black, one sugar, without me telling him, and started making it for me when he made his own and left it on the counter before I was awake. I learned that he got quiet and slightly difficult when he hadn't slept enough. Not mean, never mean, just clipped and careful. And I learned to give him space in the mornings when he looked like that and wait until he'd had his second cup of coffee before starting any real conversation. Small things, domestic things. The tiny, unremarkable accommodations of two people sharing space and choosing, again and again, to make each other's lives slightly more comfortable. I was, by about month 5, so far gone that I can barely bring myself to look back at it directly. It's like trying to look at the sun. You can see it in your peripheral vision, you can understand its shape and brightness from that angle, but if you look straight at it, you'll damage something. And then there was the question of Marcus and women. I knew he was straight. Of course I knew. He talked about women the way straight men talk about women, not with any particular crudeness, not with anything I'd call disrespect, just with a casual, natural appreciation that made it absolutely clear where his attractions lay. He dated occasionally, though nothing serious seemed to stick. He'd mention a woman from the gym or someone he'd matched with on an app and go out a few times and then not mention her again, and I'd figure it had run its course. I was always shamefully, secretly relieved when those things ran their course. And then he'd mention someone new, and I'd feel the specific variety of awfulness that comes with caring about someone who doesn't and can't care about you in the same way. And I'd go back to my room and be very adult about it, and remind myself that Marcus's happiness was what mattered, and that I wanted good things for him, and that my feelings were my responsibility to manage, not his. I was very good at those reminders. I was considerably less good at actually believing them. There was one night in September, about 7 months in, when everything almost came apart. We had been at a friend's birthday party, or rather Marcus had been invited and I had come along, and there had been more alcohol than either of us had intended to consume. We got a rideshare home, stumbled up the stairs laughing about something I couldn't even remember by the time we got through the door, and then we were in the apartment and the lights were low, and Marcus was leaning against the kitchen counter looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not quite a smile, something more searching than that, something that made my entire nervous system stand up and pay attention. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. A pause that lasted about 3,000 years. "You're a good person, Daniel," he said finally, "like actually you're one of the good ones." Which sounds simple, which sounds like nothing, but the way he said it, quiet, direct, stripped of its usual easy tone, felt like something else entirely, like something he'd been holding and had finally put down. "So are you," I said. Another pause. And then he pushed off the counter and said good night and went to his room, and I stood in the kitchen for a very long time before I followed suit. I thought about that moment for weeks. I thought about what it meant and what it didn't mean and all the ways I was probably inventing significance that wasn't there, because that's what lonely people do. Because that's what people who want something to be true do. They read the room in the most favorable light possible and call it evidence. I told myself to stop. I almost succeeded. And so we arrive at November, month 11, a Friday night, the kind of gray and cold that Austin does maybe 6 weeks a year but does thoroughly when it shows up, the kind of cold that makes you want to stay inside and pull a blanket over everything. Marcus had had a hard week. I knew this without him saying so. I knew his rhythms well enough by then to read the slight extra tension in his shoulders, the way he went quieter than usual, the way he ate dinner staring at the middle distance instead of at whatever was on television. I didn't push. I'd learned not to push. I just made sure the apartment was warm and that there was good food and that I was there, which was all I could offer and which, I had learned, was usually enough. He'd had some kind of conflict with the owner of the gym where he worked. Details trickled out over dinner, something about scheduling, about his hours being cut, about feeling like his work wasn't being valued. I listened. I said the things you say when someone is frustrated and needs to be heard rather than fixed. I did not offer solutions he hadn't asked for. After dinner he said movie, and I said sure, and that was that. He picked something from Netflix action film, fast-moving, loud. We settled into our respective corners of the couch the way we always did, Marcus with his feet up on the coffee table and me with mine tucked under me, a blanket pulled over my lap because I run cold and Marcus runs warm, and this had become another one of our silent, established accommodations. About 40 minutes in, I noticed he'd gone quiet in a different way. Not the focused quiet of watching something, but the heavy, drifting quiet of someone losing the battle against sleep. His head had dropped back slightly against the couch. His breathing had slowed. And then, without drama, without announcement, without any particular ceremony at all, his head tilted sideways and came to rest on my shoulder. I stopped breathing. I have already told you this part, but I don't think I've fully communicated what it was like inside the stop. The way time both accelerated and ceased to function normally. The way I was suddenly hyper-aware of everything, the texture of his hair against my cheek, the warmth radiating off him, the soft exhale of breath that came at regular intervals, the fact that his hand had slid from his own knee to a point that was technically on the blanket that was technically on my knee. He was asleep, genuinely, completely asleep. I could tell from his breathing, from the total relaxation of his body, from the fact that he'd stopped reacting to anything happening on screen. He was asleep and his head was on my shoulder, and he wasn't doing it on purpose or with any awareness or with any meaning at all. And I was sitting there in the blue television light feeling like the entire architecture of my carefully constructed emotional management system was about to come down around my ears. I did not move, I barely breathed. I sat there and I let the movie play and I listened to him breathe and I looked straight ahead at the screen and I thought, this is fine, this doesn't mean anything. People fall asleep on people. This is a normal human thing. And simultaneously, I am so in love with this man that it physically hurts, and I don't know what to do with that, and I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending otherwise. Both of those thoughts sat side by side inside me like two very different weather systems occupying the same sky. He slept for about an hour and a half. I sat there for every minute of it. When he woke up, slowly, the way he always woke up, in layers rather than all at once, he lifted his head and blinked and looked at me with the particular soft confusion of someone who isn't sure where they are yet. "Oh," he said, his voice rough with sleep, "did I fall asleep on you?" "Yeah," I said, my voice came out completely normal. I was very proud of this. "Sorry," he said, rubbing his eyes. "It's fine," I said, "you needed it." He looked at me for a second, just a second, but a second with a specific quality, a second where he seemed to be taking something in, and then he nodded and looked back at the screen and said, "What'd I miss?" And I told him, and that was that. That was that. Except it wasn't, because later, lying in my room in the dark listening to the sound of his footsteps moving down the hall to his own room, I finally let myself feel all of it. All the things I'd been carefully, diligently not feeling for 11 months, all the weight of it. All the impossible, inconvenient, thoroughly unwelcome truth of it. I was in love with my straight roommate. I had been for a long time. And I had absolutely no idea what to do. Here is the thing about realizing something you've been avoiding for a long time. The realization doesn't change anything. You wake up the next morning and the sun is still where it was, the coffee maker is still making its gurgling sounds, your roommate is still padding around the kitchen at 6 in the morning in athletic shorts and a worn-out college t-shirt. And the world is exactly the same as it was yesterday. Except you are not exactly the same as you were yesterday. I lay in bed for 20 minutes after I woke up, staring at the ceiling and doing the adult, responsible thing, which was to have a very clear, very firm conversation with myself about reality. Reality number 1, Marcus was straight. Reality number 2, Marcus was my roommate and my best friend, and both of those things had real value and real meaning and did not need to be complicated. Reality number 3, feelings, however inconvenient, were manageable. People managed inconvenient feelings all the time. People went their whole lives feeling things they couldn't act on and they were fine. They were better than fine. They were people with integrity and self-knowledge who understood the difference between what they felt and what they could responsibly pursue. Reality number 4, I needed to get out of my own head and go have coffee. I got up, I went to the kitchen. Marcus was already there, doing what he always did before a run, filling a water bottle, checking his phone, eating a banana in 3 bites like he was in a race against time. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Morning," I said. "Coffee's on." "Thank you." I poured myself a cup. He finished his banana, capped his water bottle, stretched his arms above his head until his back made a sound like bubble wrap, completely normal, completely Marcus. "Hey," he said, and the word had a slight weight to it, a slight deliberateness, and my entire body went still. "Yes. Sorry again about last night falling asleep like that." He looked a little sheepish. "That was rude." "Marcus," I said, "I've told you it's not rude, you were tired." Still, he picked up his phone, then put it down again, and he looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite catalog. "You're too easy on me, you know that." I didn't know what to do with that, so I said probably and drank my coffee, and he went for his run, and I stood at the kitchen window watching the gray November morning and thought, this is manageable. I can manage this. And for a few weeks, I did manage it. I managed it by throwing myself into work. I managed it by making plans with Priya and other friends on the evenings I would otherwise have spent on the couch with Marcus. I managed it by having a very sensible, very therapeutic conversation with myself every morning in the shower about how feelings were not facts and attraction was not destiny, and I was a grown adult with agency over my own choices. I managed it right up until the night Marcus came home and sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't mean he sat down in a normal way. I mean he came through the front door in the early evening on a Wednesday, dropped his gym bag in the hallway, walked into the kitchen, and then just sat down. On the tile floor, his back against the cabinets, his knees pulled up, his head tipped back. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop. I looked up, I looked at him. "Marcus." "Give me a minute," he said, his eyes were closed. I closed my laptop, I waited. He sat on the floor for about 3 minutes, breathing slowly, eyes shut, very still. Then he opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling and said, "They cut my hours again." The gym, the same situation from before, apparently worse. "By how much?" "Enough that I can't make rent if it keeps up." I absorbed this. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." He looked at me, and something about his face in that moment, the tiredness in it, the rare visible vulnerability, reached straight through all my careful management and grabbed something in my chest. "I don't want to worry you." "You're not worrying me," I said. "Wells, you are, but not about the rent." "I'm not worried about the rent, I'm worried about you." He was quiet for a moment. "Come sit on an actual chair," I said. "I'll make dinner." "You don't have to." "Marcus, chair, I'll make dinner." He got up off the floor. He sat at the table. I made pasta, nothing fancy, just the garlic and olive oil and parmesan that I could throw together in 20 minutes. And I opened a bottle of wine that had been sitting in the cabinet for 2 months waiting for an occasion, and we sat at the kitchen table and he talked and I listened. He talked about the gym owner, about the conflict that had started over a scheduling dispute and grown into something more personal, something about not being respected, not being seen. He talked about his plans, the ones that had always been in the background. He wanted to open his own space one day, something small, something his. He talked about the gap between what he wanted and where he was, and the frustration of that gap, and the fear that it was going to stay a gap forever. I listened to all of it. I said the right things when saying things was useful, and I was quiet when being quiet was more useful. And at some point during all of this, without noticing the exact moment it happened, we moved from the kitchen table to the couch, and at some point after that the wine bottle was empty and it was almost midnight and we were just talking. Not about the gym anymore, about everything else. About what we wanted, about what we were afraid of, about who we'd been before we were the people we were now. He told me about his father, who had been a serious, demanding man who loved him but never found an easy way to show it, and about the complicated grief of losing that man 3 years ago before the relationship had ever found the ease it needed. He told me about a relationship in his early 20s that had gone wrong in a way that left him slower to trust, more careful with his heart. I told him things I rarely told people. About my own family, about the loneliness of the first 2 years after I came out, when I didn't quite fit the world I'd left and hadn't found the world I was going to. About the way building a life in a new city can feel like rebuilding a self from scratch, and about how the worst part of that is not the hard days but the ordinary days, the days when you're just a person doing unremarkable things, and there's no one around who knows your whole story. "I know your story," Marcus said quietly. I looked at him. "I mean, not all of it, not yet." He had his wine glass balanced on his knee, and he was looking at me with the same expression from the kitchen hallway 2 months ago, that searching, open, uncharacteristically unguarded expression. "But I want to. I feel like I keep learning things about you and I want to know more." The apartment was very quiet. "I feel the same way about you," I said. We looked at each other for what was probably only a few seconds but felt longer. Then Marcus drained the last of his wine and said, "I should sleep," and I said yeah, and we both got up and went to our respective rooms. And I lay in the dark thinking, what is happening? After that night something changed. I want to be careful about how I describe this because the thing that changed wasn't obvious or dramatic, it was subtle, tectonic, the kind of change that you only recognize in retrospect. Like how you don't notice the season changing day to day, but one morning you wake up and it's unmistakably a different season from when you last really looked. Marcus started lingering. That's the only way I know how to put it. Before, when we were in the same space, there was an easy, comfortable quality to it, but also a natural independence. We could be together without being focused on each other, orbiting the same rooms without necessarily gravitating. After that kitchen floor night, he started gravitating. He'd come home and find me working, and instead of going straight to his room or the gym or the kitchen, he'd stop by my desk and ask what I was working on, and then actually look at whatever I showed him and say something about it. He started joining me for coffee in the mornings more consistently. He started initiating the Tuesday tie night instead of just showing up for it. Small things, things with multiple possible explanations, things you could look at and say, this is just friendship deepening, this is just two people who have had a good honest conversation and feel closer because of it. This is nothing. Priya didn't think it was nothing. Priya Mehta was my oldest friend in Austin, a software engineer with a gift for reading people that I had always found both invaluable and occasionally terrifying. I told her about Marcus early on, not about my feelings, just about the roommate situation, and she had absorbed that information with the patience of someone waiting to be proven right about something. I met her for lunch one December afternoon, about a month after the kitchen floor night, and somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, I made the mistake of describing the changes in Marcus's behavior with what I thought was appropriate neutrality. Priya looked at me across the table and said very calmly, "He likes you." "He's my friend," I said. "Daniel." "Priya." "He likes you," she said again, with the pleasant firmness of someone stating a geometric truth. "He's straight," I said. People are more complicated than the labels they give themselves at 26. That's a very convenient thing to say. It's a very true thing to say, she tilted her head. What does your gut tell you? My gut was telling me approximately 17 different things simultaneously, many of them contradictory, and I told her so. That, she said, is what your gut tells you when you're avoiding the clearest version of something because the clearest version is scary. I can't act on anything even if your theory were right, I said. He's my roommate, he's my best friend, and I don't know that your theory is right. I would be gambling everything on a hunch. What are you doing now, she said. Managing, I said. How's that working out for you? I didn't answer. She ate a forkful of her salad with the serenity of someone who has made their point and is content to let it settle. I thought about what Priya said for the rest of December. I thought about it while I was working and while I was running errands and while I was lying in bed at night. I thought about it while I was sitting across from Marcus at the kitchen table, watching him read a book with his coffee getting cold beside him, the easy comfort of his presence filling up the apartment the way light fills a room. I thought about it and arrived at the same answer every time. I couldn't know. I genuinely could not know. And not knowing was not a sufficient basis for doing anything because the cost of being wrong was losing something that mattered more to me than almost anything else. And so I managed. I managed right through December, right through the holidays. We each went to our respective families for Christmas, texted each other from our parents' houses, came back to Austin on the same day and had dinner together like we'd been gone for months rather than a week. I managed through New Year's, through a party at a friend's place where Marcus spent an hour talking to a woman named Vanessa, and I stood on the other side of the room managing very hard. I managed until January, when everything stopped being manageable. Vanessa, I should tell you about Vanessa. She was a graphic designer too, as it happened, which was how Marcus introduced us at the New Year's party. You two have the same job, you should talk. And she was smart and funny and genuinely good company, and I liked her immediately in the way that made me feel guilty for also resenting her slightly. She and Marcus exchanged numbers. He went out with her twice in January. He mentioned her casually, no different from how he'd mentioned the other brief connections that hadn't stuck, and I performed the appropriate friendly interest and reminded myself of realities 1 through 4 and carried on. And then he came home one Saturday afternoon looking slightly off and I said, "How was it?" meaning the date, and he sat down on the couch and said, "Fine," in the tone that means the opposite. What happened? Nothing happened, it was fine. He picked up his phone, looked at it, put it down. She's great, she's really great. But, a long pause. She asked me something, he said, and I didn't know how to answer it. I waited. She said. He stopped, restarted. She was talking about the kind of relationship she's looking for, and she asked about me, what I was looking for, whether I wanted something serious. What did you say? I said I wasn't sure. He looked at me, because I'm not sure. What is it you're not sure about? Another pause. This one had a specific quality, a held breath quality, like something was standing very still just inside it. I don't know, he said finally, which wasn't an answer, which was, somehow, the most information-dense thing he had said. He didn't go out with Vanessa again. It was Priya who connected the dots I was refusing to connect. I called her the evening after the Vanessa conversation and told her about it, not quite knowing why I was calling, and she listened patiently and then said, Daniel, when he said he wasn't sure what he was looking for, what do you think he meant? I don't know, I said. That's the point. Let me ask you something different. When you were sitting there listening to him talk about this, what were you thinking? I didn't answer immediately. Daniel. I was thinking, I said slowly, that the reason he doesn't know what he's looking for is that what he's looking for is in the same room as him and he won't let himself see it. Silence on the other end. I know, I said. I know I'm projecting. Or, said Priya very quietly, you're not. February arrived with the particular bleakness it always does. Gray skies, a collective emotional slump that no holiday or occasion seems adequate to address. Marcus had found a solution to his job situation. He started taking private clients on the side, building what he hoped would eventually become his own independent training business. He was energized by it, but also under more pressure, working longer hours, sleeping less than he should. I threw myself into a big new project at work, a branding overhaul for a restaurant group that required more of my time and attention than anything I'd done in months. We were both busier, both a little stretched, and so we saw each other less and valued the time we did share more. There was a specific evening in the second week of February that I want to describe carefully, because I've thought about it so many times since then that I've worn all the rough edges off it, and what remains is the pure essential shape of the thing. We had eaten dinner together, the first real dinner we'd had together in almost 2 weeks, with both of us having the time and energy to actually sit at the table and talk rather than eat standing at the counter between obligations. We talked about work, about his clients, about a design project I was wrestling with. We laughed a lot. It felt, as it always felt, like the most natural thing in the world. After we did the dishes together, another of our unspoken routines, he washes, I dry, we stand side by side at the sink and talk or don't talk depending on the mood. And there was a moment, somewhere in the middle of the dishes, when Marcus said something that made me laugh, and I turned to look at him and he was already looking at me. Not the way you look at someone you've been caught watching something, not embarrassed, just looking, present and direct, and with something in his eyes that I had no clean name for. We were very close. We were close the way you get close when you're standing side by side at a sink, which is close but not unusually so, which is the kind of proximity that has 100 innocent explanations. What? I said. Nothing, he said, but he didn't look away. I dried the dish I was holding, slowly. My hands were completely steady, which I considered an achievement. Marcus, I said very quietly. Not asking anything, just his name in the space between us like a small light. Yeah, he said, also quiet, also not quite a response to anything I'd said. The faucet was running, the kitchen was warm. Outside, the February wind made small sounds against the windows. And then Marcus looked away and turned off the faucet and said, I'm going to get an early night, and I said, okay, and that was the end of that. Except it wasn't the end of anything. It was, I think, the beginning. 3 days after the kitchen sink moment, Marcus knocked on my bedroom door at 10:30 at night. I was still up, at my desk, working on the restaurant branding project. I said come in, and he opened the door and stood in the doorway looking like someone who'd been building towards something and wasn't entirely sure they'd reached it yet. Hey, he said. Hey. You busy? Finishing up, what's up? He leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. He looked at my desk, then at the floor, then at me. This was not his usual body language. His usual body language was comfortable, self-possessed, easy in his own skin. This was something else. I've been thinking, he said. Okay. About stuff. He made a slight gesture with his hand that could have meant anything. Stuff, I repeated. Yeah, a pause, us this, through another gesture, how things are. My heart was doing something medically inadvisable. I kept my face neutral. I kept my voice even. I would later reflect, a remarkably good actor. What about it? I said. He looked at me for a long moment. And I could see it, I could genuinely see it, the thing he was trying to say and the thing stopping him from saying it, occupying the same space, pulling in opposite directions, a live tension that had a physical quality. Never mind, he said, it can wait. Marcus, it's fine, finish your work. And he went back to his room and closed the door. I sat at my desk and I put my face in my hands and I took several very slow, very deliberate breaths and I thought, we are going to have to talk. At some point, one of us is going to have to say the actual words, and I don't know if that's going to be me or him, but it is going to happen, and when it does, everything is going to change. Whether it changed for better or worse, that I genuinely didn't know. It was a Thursday, February 14th, which I did not register as significant at the time because I am not someone who pays particular attention to Valentine's Day, and because Marcus had made no mention of any plans. He had come home from a client session at around 7, made himself food and knocked on my door to see if I'd eaten. I hadn't. We made dinner together, which was also one of our things, though less codified than Tuesday Thai night, more spontaneous. He made the protein, I made the vegetables, we split the cooking like two people who had been doing it together for a long time. We ate, we watched something on TV, not paying much attention to it. Marcus was quieter than usual again, but a different kind of quiet from the Hardweek quiet I knew. This was a thinking quiet, a building toward something quiet. I waited. About an hour after dinner, he muted the TV and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Something personal." "Go ahead." He looked at his hands, then at me. "Have you ever," he stopped. "Have you ever been in a situation where you felt something you didn't expect to feel and you didn't know what to do with it?" Very carefully I said, "Yes." "And what did you do?" "I sat with it for a long time," I said, "probably too long, and eventually the not doing anything stopped being sustainable." He nodded slowly, he was quiet for a moment. "Daniel," he said. "Yeah. I need to tell you something and I need you to hear it I need you to just let me get through it before you say anything." My heart, my poor heart. "Okay," I said. He took a breath, and then he said steadily, the way someone says something they've rehearsed and are now performing, word by word. "I don't fully understand what's happening with me right now. I've been trying to figure it out for a while and I haven't been able to. But I know that when I'm with you, it's different from how I've ever been with anyone else. And I've been telling myself that's just because you're my best friend, and that's a true thing, you're my best friend. But it's also there's something else in it, and I don't know what to call it yet. And I'm not asking you to, I don't know what I'm asking. I needed to say it, because not saying it was starting to make me feel like I was lying, and I don't want to lie to you." He stopped. The room was very quiet. "Okay," I said, because he'd asked me not to say anything, and because my vocabulary had temporarily evacuated the building. "Okay," he said like an echo. A long pause. And then, because the moment seemed to require it, because standing on the edge of something without moving either way was no longer an option, "Marcus, how long?" He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Honestly, a while." I kept trying to, he shook his head. "I kept trying to figure out if it was just because you're important to me, whether what I was feeling was just an intense friendship thing. I've never felt this way about a man before, I didn't have a framework for it." "Do you have one now?" "I don't know, I don't have a neat category, I just know that when you're not here this place feels wrong, and when you are here it feels right. And when you laughed at something I said the other night I thought," he stopped. "What?" I said softly. "I thought I'd like to make him laugh every day for the rest of my life." The breath went out of me. "Marcus," I said, and my voice, to my embarrassment, was not entirely steady. "I have been in love with you since approximately month 3. He stared at me. "Month 3, I said, "of living here. I tried not to be, I was very responsible about it. I had conversations with myself daily, it didn't help." "Month 3, he repeated, like a man checking whether what he heard was what he heard. "Month 3, I confirmed. He looked at me for a long time. Then something happened to his face, not just the smile, which was the usual dimpled, devastating one, but something underneath the smile, something that came from further in. "I'm sorry it took me this long," he said. "You needed the time," I said. "That's okay."
Is it? Yes.
Another silence, but a completely different kind. The before silence had been loaded, pressurized, full of unspoken things. This silence was open, light, like a room after you finally opened a window you'd forgotten was there. So Marcus said, "What do we do now?" And I said, for the first time in 11 months of carefully managing myself into emotional paralysis, "I think we figure it out together." Let me tell you how different it felt to wake up the next morning. I've described the mornings that came before, the careful conversations with myself, the management strategies, the deliberate architecture of not feeling. This morning was not that. This morning I woke up and the first thing I thought was not a strategy or a reminder or a reality check. The first thing I thought was his name, and it felt for the first time like something I was allowed to think. Marcus was already up. I could hear him moving in the kitchen. The coffee maker was running. Through my bedroom door came the smell of it, strong and dark, the way he always made it. I got up, I went to the kitchen. He was at the counter, back to me, 2 cups already out. He heard me come in and turned around, and for just a second, just one honest, unguarded second, there was something in his face that I hadn't seen there before. Something soft and slightly wondering, like a man looking at something he'd wanted for a long time and hadn't quite gotten used to being allowed to want. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He handed me my cup, black, one sugar, the way he'd always made it. I took it. Our fingers touched for a moment on the ceramic. "So," he said. So I said. We stood there in the kitchen in the February morning light, both holding coffee, both slightly new to being whatever we were now, and it was awkward and it was tender and it was real. "I didn't sleep a lot," he said.
Me either.
I kept thinking about, he stopped. "I've never done this before, this specific thing. Being in a relationship with a man. Being in any relationship that started as that felt like this from the beginning." He looked at his coffee. "With other people it was always meeting, interest, dating, a clear sequence. This was, you were already important to me before I figured out the rest of it." "Is that a problem?" "No," he said immediately. Then, "I don't know, it means I care about getting it right more than I usually would." "That seems like a good thing." "It feels terrifying," he said. And the frankness of it, the simplicity and honesty of it, made something in my chest ache with affection. "Yeah," I said, "it does." We drank our coffee, the morning moved around us. Neither of us said anything more complicated than that, which was, I think, exactly right. Here is what I want to tell you about the weeks that followed, and it's something that I think gets lost in the stories people tell about falling into love. It is not always graceful. Marcus and I knew each other extraordinarily well by the time we acknowledged what was between us. We knew each other's habits, rhythms, preferences, moods. We knew the things that made the other laugh and the things that required patience and the things that were better left for a second cup of coffee. We had a foundation most people spend the first year of a relationship trying to build. But we didn't know how to be this. Whatever this was, neither of us had a clean word for it yet. We were careful about words, we let it breathe before we tried to name it. And so there were moments of wonderful ease, moments where it felt like we had simply slid into a new room in a house we already knew, and there were also moments of uncertainty, of hesitation, of two people on unfamiliar ground trying to move carefully. Marcus had never been in a relationship with a man before. I want to handle this with care because his experience was his own and not mine to summarize, but what I can tell you is what I witnessed. A man doing the honest, unglamorous, genuinely difficult work of understanding something new about himself. He didn't announce it, he didn't perform a journey, he was just thoughtful, quiet about it. He asked me questions sometimes, not about me specifically but about broader things, about my own experience of understanding myself, and I answered them as honestly as I could. Some nights he needed space to think and I gave it without making it into a thing. Other nights he needed me close and I was there. He was throughout all of it more honest about his confusion and uncertainty than most people would be. He didn't pretend he had it figured out. He didn't put a label on himself before he was ready to. And there was something about watching someone do that, watching someone sit with an uncomfortable truth about themselves and refuse to cover it up with something convenient, that deepened the feeling I had for him in ways I hadn't anticipated. There was one evening, about 3 weeks in, when he came home clearly having had a difficult day but wasn't talking about why, and I could tell the why was internal rather than external, and I made dinner and we ate and watched something and then he said, "I talked to my friend Darius today." Darius was his oldest friend, someone he'd grown up with, deeply important to him. I had heard many stories about Darius, I had never met him. "About," I said carefully. About us, kind of, about what's happening with me. I put down what I was holding, I looked at him. How did that go? He was quiet for a moment. He was surprised, he said. He didn't, I mean, this isn't something he would have predicted. He needed a minute. Did he take the minute okay? He'll be fine, Marcus said. He's my brother, basically, he'll be fine. But it was weird, saying it out loud to someone who has known me my whole life, making it real in that way. He looked at me. I'm used to things being simple. I'm used to knowing who I am. You still know who you are, I said. Yeah, but I know more of it now than I did before, and that takes some getting used to. I understood that exactly. I had been 16 when I figured out who I was, and even then, even in the relative safety of a family who would prove to be loving and accepting, there had been weeks of sitting with the new information, of running my hands over the shape of it, of learning to stop flinching at the truth before I could hold it comfortably. It gets easier, I said. The knowing part, the more you sit with it, the more it just becomes part of how you know yourself, not a disruption anymore. He looked at me. How long did it take you? Honestly, about a year before it stopped feeling like a secret, even when it wasn't a secret. He nodded slowly, then he reached out, a simple gesture, unhurried, and put his hand over mine on the couch cushion between us. We sat like that for a while. It was, in its quiet way, one of the most significant moments of my adult life. By March, we had arrived at something that felt stable, felt true, even if it was still new enough that we handled it carefully. We hadn't defined it formally. We did no what are we conversation, which I know might seem strange, but the what are we conversation has always seemed to me like a formality that matters less than the actual living, and what we were living was clear enough. We were together. In the full sense of the word, in the sense that included the other senses, in the sense that I no longer spent nights in my room pretending not to feel things. In the sense that we woke up in the same bed on the weekends and made coffee together and moved through the apartment as a unit rather than two separate people sharing space. What it meant beyond that, what label it carried, what future it pointed to, how it situated Marcus in the landscape of his own identity, those questions were still open. I didn't push them. They would find their shape in time, and the time belonged to him. What I can tell you is this: I had never felt at home in my own life the way I felt at home in those early weeks. I had been managing myself for so long, keeping everything carefully organized and contained and at the proper distance from anything that might hurt it, and now the management was over and I was just there, present, allowed to feel what I felt. It was terrifying and it was wonderful, and I walked around in it like a man who has been holding his breath for a year and has just finally exhaled. I called my mom on a Sunday in March. My mom, who had been asking since I moved to Austin why I sounded a little lonely, who had been gently probing every phone call for news on my social life, who had asked about Marcus specifically twice after I mentioned him once. I told her about him, not all of it, not yet, but enough. I told her there was someone who mattered, someone I was figuring things out with, someone who was also figuring things out. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Is he a good person?" "He's one of the best people I've ever met," I said. "Does he treat you well?" "Yeah, Mom, he treats me very well." "Then I can't wait to meet him," she said simply, and changed the subject to whether I needed her to mail me anything. I texted Marcus right after, "My mom wants to meet you." His response came 30 seconds later, terrifying, also kind of amazing: "Tell her hi." Here is the practical reality of being two people who live together and have become something more than roommates. You have to navigate the world as that thing, and the world has opinions. Some of our friends figured it out before we said anything. Priya sent me a text the weekend after the conversation that just said, "I told you so, you're welcome." I didn't tell her she'd been right. I didn't need to, she already knew. Other friends were surprised, but mostly in the way that good people are surprised by news they hadn't anticipated, with questions, with genuine interest, with no sense that this was a problem that required solving. His friend Darius came to visit in April, and I was nervous in a way I hadn't been about anything in months. Marcus had told me Darius was fine, was working through it, was going to be supportive, but nervous is nervous, and sometimes nervousness doesn't listen to information. Darius showed up on a Saturday afternoon. He was big and loud and had the same easy physical confidence as Marcus, and when Marcus introduced us, he looked at me for a long moment with an expression I couldn't read. Then he said, Marcus told me you make him laugh more than anyone he's ever met.
I try, I said.
That's the right thing to do, said Darius and shook my hand, and that was that. We went to dinner, the three of us, and Darius asked me good questions and listened to the answers and got along with me in the easy, uncomplicated way that men get along when there's no competition between them and they both care about the same person. By the end of the evening, he was calling me D and arguing with me good-naturedly about something sports-related that I had no business having an opinion on, and Marcus sat across from both of us looking like a man whose two worlds had just slotted together more neatly than he'd expected. On the way home, walking 3 blocks from the restaurant to where we'd parked, Marcus walked between us and said, "This is good."
Darius said, "Yeah, man, it is." And I said, "Yeah."
And no one needed to say anything else. I want to be honest with you here because this story would not deserve to be called a true story if I only told you the beautiful parts. April was difficult. The beautiful parts were real, they were as real as anything I've described, and they were more than sufficient to sustain both of us through what came with them. But April brought complications, and the complications had weight. The first was Marcus's family. His mother, Evelyn, was a deeply religious woman, warm, loving, enormously important to him, and she was not finding this easy. Marcus had told her in March, which had taken more courage than I'm able to fully convey, and her response had been the complicated response of a woman who loved her son completely and was also genuinely struggling with what he was telling her. She didn't say anything cruel. I want to be clear about that because Marcus was clear about that with me. She didn't reject him, didn't threaten, didn't weaponize, but she was quiet where she was usually present, and she needed time, and the needing time had a cost. I watched Marcus navigate this with a grace that was not easy but was chosen deliberately every day. He gave her space without pulling away. He called when he said he'd call. He was patient with her slower pace and gentle with her confusion. He told me once late at night when the difficulty of it was visible on his face, "She loves me, I know she loves me, and love doesn't always know how to do the right thing immediately, it sometimes has to learn." I held on to that sentence for a long time. The second complication was mine. I had a colleague, someone I'd worked with remotely for 2 years, been friendly with, trusted professionally, who I'll call Nathan. Nathan knew I was gay. Nathan was, to all appearances, a reasonable and thoughtful person. Nathan, upon hearing through the work-adjacent grapevine that I was in a relationship, asked me about it, and when I told him the short version, yes, with a man, his name is Marcus, we live together, Nathan's response was a specific flavor of patronizing that I have zero patience for. "Isn't that a bit?" he said. "I mean, be careful. If he hasn't been in a relationship with a man before, he might not really know what he wants. You don't want to be someone's experiment." This comment made me feel something that I can best describe as a very quiet, very controlled kind of fury. I told Nathan that Marcus knew exactly what he wanted, and that his curiosity about my relationship was noted and not requested, and that I'd see him on our next project call. I went home and told Marcus what Nathan had said. Marcus was silent for a moment, then he said, "Am I someone who seems like he doesn't know what he wants?" "No," I said, "you're one of the most self-aware people I've ever met." "Then we don't care what Nathan thinks." "No," I said. "Okay," he said, and then he said something I have thought about every day since. "Daniel, what I feel for you is not confusion. I understand it might look that way from outside because I didn't have a name for it before, but it's not confusion. I know exactly what it is and who it's for." I looked at him. "I know exactly who it's for," he said again, quieter. "Some things you don't respond to with words, some things you just let settle into you and carry." It was early May when we had what I'll call the hard conversation, which was really less of a single conversation and more of a series of conversations that happened over the course of about a week, each one opening a door that the next one had to walk through. It started, as the important ones often do, with a small thing. I was distracted during dinner, a deadline, a project issue, and Marcus noticed and said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Nothing, work stuff, it's fine," and he looked at me and said, "You don't have to do that." "Do what?" "Say it's fine when it's not." "It is fine," I said, "it's just work." "I don't mean the work," he said. We looked at each other across the table. "I mean in general," he said. "You do this thing where you manage yourself, where you make yourself small so you don't take up too much space. I've watched you do it for months." I was surprised enough that I didn't immediately respond. I noticed it before any of this, he said. I noticed you were careful about what you showed. I thought it was just personality, but then I started understanding, and I think it's more than personality. I think it's a habit you developed because I spent a long time being someone whose feelings were inconvenient, I said, quietly, factually, the way you say a true thing once you've identified it. He was quiet. Not here, I said quickly, not with you, but before, for a long time, I got very good at taking up the minimum amount of emotional space. I don't want the minimum amount, he said. He stopped. I want all of it, whatever you have. I want you to be able to take up the space you actually need. This was, I want to tell you, the conversation that broke something open in me. Not in a bad way, in the way things need to break open to let air in. In the way a window that's been painted shut finally releases and the room suddenly has weather in it again, real weather, the smell of outside and the sound of wind. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just sat with what he'd said and let it be true and let it matter. Then I said, okay. Okay. Okay, I said, I'll try. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. That's all I'm asking, he said. That conversation led to others, about what each of us needed and hadn't said, about what we were afraid of in this specific situation, not in relationships in general, but in this one, which was specific and new and mattered more than either of us had a convenient way of expressing. I told him I was afraid of being the temporary thing. The experiment, to use Nathan's word. I knew he'd told me that wasn't what this was. I believed him. But the fear was there anyway, pre-rational, underneath logic, the kind of fear that doesn't respond to argument. He listened to this. He didn't argue. He said, that fear makes sense. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't make sense, but I need you to know and I need you to actually hear it, not just acknowledge it, that this is not temporary for me. What I feel isn't a phase I'm passing through. It's just who I am and you're part of who I am now, and that's not going to change. He told me he was afraid of a different thing, of getting it wrong, of not knowing how to be in this, of the parts of it that were new to him becoming failures instead of learning, of the learning hurting me. You're not going to get it wrong, I said. How do you know? Because getting it wrong would require not caring, and you care too much. That's not how you do anything. He looked at me for a long time. You know me, he said, almost like a realization, even though it shouldn't have been one by then. I've been paying attention for almost a year, I said. Something in his expression shifted, soft and wide and honest, the most unguarded version of his face, the version I'd come to recognize as the one that lived underneath all the others. Yeah, he said, you have. And then, as it tends to do when you're not looking, the hard part started to ease. Marcus's mother called him one evening in June and talked for 2 hours. When he came out of his room afterward, his eyes were slightly red and his face had a look I'd seen on people who have just had the thing they were carrying lifted, even partially, even just for now. She's trying, he said. I can see that, I said. She's not there yet, but she said she just wants me to be happy. She said that's what she keeps coming back to, that she just wants me to be happy. That's everything, I said. Yeah, he said, and then he sat down next to me and leaned his head on my shoulder, deliberately awake, knowing exactly what he was doing, and said, "Thank you for waiting." I thought about the first time his head had been on my shoulder, the involuntary, accidental, asleep version, the version where I'd stopped breathing and stared at the television and didn't allow myself to feel a single thing. You were worth waiting for, I said. He made a small sound, not quite a laugh, something warmer and quieter. We sat there while the summer evening came in through the windows, and outside the city moved through its ordinary business. And inside the apartment everything was ordinary too, just two people on a couch, just a head on a shoulder, just the simplest possible version of being where you're supposed to be. His private training business grew through the summer. By July he had enough clients to have left the gym entirely if he'd wanted to, and by August he was genuinely considering it. I watched him come alive in this, watched the specific energy of someone doing work that belongs to them, that they built from nothing, that carries their own name on it. He talked about the future differently. Not with the tired frustration of the man who'd sat on the kitchen floor in December, but with the clear-eyed, planning kind of talk that means someone sees a path. My own work expanded too. The restaurant branding had gone well enough that I was asked to take on 2 more projects from their referrals, and I started thinking cautiously about what it would mean to go fully freelance. We spent several evenings over the summer in practical conversation about what that would look like, not romanticizing it, not planning beyond our actual information, but taking seriously the idea that our lives could be built according to our own specifications. These were the conversations that, more than almost anything else, told me what we were. Not the tender ones, not the difficult ones, but the practical ones. The ones about budgets and timelines and what-ifs. The ones where we talked about our futures as if they were naturally overlapping, as if making plans that accounted for each other was simply how plans were made now. There was a night in August, near the end of a week that had been particularly good. Both of us doing work we liked, both of us well-rested, the apartment warm in that specific summer evening way. When Marcus sat across from me at the kitchen table and said something that I want to include here because it's probably the most important thing he ever said to me, not the most dramatic or the most beautiful, but the most important. He said, "I used to think I had myself figured out, like I thought I knew the shape of my life, and then I moved in here and a pause. You changed the shape of my life." I looked at him. "Not in a scary way," he said. It's a better shape now, it fits better, I don't know how to explain that." "You explained it fine," I said. "Did I?" "Yeah." He looked at me for a moment. "You know what the stupid irony is," he said. "What?" "That couch night, the night I fell asleep on your shoulder." He shook his head and a smile moved across his face, self-deprecating and warm. "I woke up and I apologized, and you said it's fine, you needed it. And then I went to bed and I lay there thinking about why I'd moved toward you instead of away. When people are falling asleep, he laughed a little. They usually fall toward where they feel safest." The kitchen was very quiet. "I fell toward you," he said simply. August 14th? 1 year since Marcus had first moved into the apartment, to the day, which neither of us had consciously tracked but which Marcus had apparently been aware of, because he came home that afternoon with Thai food and a small bottle of good sake and said, "Happy anniversary of you not running a background check on me." "I did run a background check on you," I said. "You what?" "Basic one, Priya told me to." He stared at me. "You passed," I said. He laughed, the real laugh, the low, devastating one, and shook his head and set the food on the coffee table, and we ate Tuesday Thai night on a Saturday because that's the kind of rule-breaking that seemed appropriate. We talked about the year. Not sentimentally, or rather not only sentimentally, we talked about it the way people who are comfortable with each other talk about the past, which is honestly, which means including the difficult parts. I told him about the first 3 months, about the daily management conversations, about sitting on the couch not breathing while he slept on my shoulder. He covered his face with one hand. "Daniel. I was very responsible about it," I said. "You should have said something." "You were straight," I said, "as far as anyone knew." "As far as I knew," he said. He lowered his hand. "That's the thing I keep coming back to, not about you, about me, about how long it took me to even be available to know what I actually wanted." "We got there," I said. "We did," he picked up his sake. "I'm sorry it took so long." "Marcus," I said and waited until he was looking at me. "Everything happened exactly when it needed to." He studied me for a moment, then he nodded slowly and drank his sake and said, "Yeah, okay, yeah. I want to tell you what love actually looks like, after the revelation and the complications and the growth. I want to tell you what it looks like on an unremarkable Tuesday in the fall of our second year, because I think the unremarkable Tuesday is more honest than the dramatic moments, and I want to be honest with you. It looks like this. Marcus is up at 5. I hear him moving through the apartment, the soft sounds of someone who has spent years learning not to wake people up. The coffee maker, the front door opening and closing for his run. Silence. I sleep for another hour and a half. When I get up, there is coffee on the counter, black, 1 sugar. I work at my desk until noon. At some point he comes home, says good morning even though it isn't morning anymore, eats something standing at the counter, goes to shower, comes back, asks what I'm working on, looks at it, says something useful. We eat lunch together usually, the kitchen table, whatever's in the fridge, nothing fancy. We talk about things, his clients, my projects, the book he's reading, something one of us saw online that the other would find interesting. We argue mildly and pleasurably about whatever disagreement is currently available. He wins sometimes, I win sometimes, neither of us keeps score. The afternoons are our own. He sees clients in the afternoons, I work or run errands or call my parents. The apartment has a comfortable independence during these hours, both of us doing what we do, the space holding both of us without requiring anything. Evenings we converge. Dinner almost always together now, the cooking split between us without discussion. Television or reading or just talking, whatever the night calls for. He falls asleep early most nights because he gets up early, and sometimes he falls asleep on me on purpose now, deliberately, because he knows he's allowed and because he likes it and because I have told him more than once and with feeling that I still don't mind. These are the things that love looks like on a Tuesday. Not the proposal on the beach, not the grand declaration in the rain, just Tuesday. Just coffee and lunch and arguing about nothing and the particular weight of him when he falls asleep against you and the particular peace of knowing, finally and completely, that this is where you're supposed to be. I want to tell you about the first time I met Evelyn because it is a story that belongs in this story, and because it ends the way I wish more things in this world ended. It was October, a year and 2 months after Marcus moved in, and she was coming to Austin for a visit. Marcus had told her everything by then, not in installments or with caveats, but fully plainly the way he did things. He had told her what I was to him and what we were to each other, and that he was asking her to meet me not as a test or a challenge, but because I was important to him and she was important to him, and he needed them to not be kept separate. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon. I shook her hand and said it was wonderful to meet her and offered her coffee, all the ordinary hospitalities, and she looked at me with the careful, measuring gaze of a mother assessing the person her child has chosen. I tried to be exactly what I was. I didn't perform, I didn't oversell myself. I offered her coffee and sat at the kitchen table and let the conversation find its shape. She was a small woman, surprised me given how tall Marcus was, sharp eyes, a voice that was warm when it was warm and precise when it was precise. She had his quality of actually listening to what people said, which I recognized now as hereditary. We talked for a while, the three of us, general things. And then Marcus was called to the other room to deal with something on his phone, and it was Evelyn and me alone in the kitchen. A pause. Then she said, "He's happier than I've seen him in years." I didn't know what to say to that. I said, "I'm glad." He carried a lot, even as a child, always taking care of others before himself. She looked at her coffee cup. "He takes care of you." "He does," I said, "and I take care of him." She looked up at me. "Good," she said, "that's how it should be." Another pause. "I'm trying," she said, and her voice had a different quality now, honest in a way that cost her something. It's not where I expected my life to be, this is not what I expected, but I know my son, I know who he is, and I see how he is with you." She looked at me steadily. "I'm trying." "That's everything," I said, because I had learned that from Marcus. From watching him say it about her, and because it was true. Something in her face softened, not completely, not all at once, but softened. We drank our coffee. When Marcus came back into the kitchen, he looked between us with the expression of a man who had been preparing himself for one outcome and was cautiously recalibrating to another. "Everything okay?" he said. "Yes," his mother said in a voice that meant it. He looked at me. I nodded. He sat down at the table with us, and the afternoon went on. I am telling you this story because it is true, and because true stories deserve to be told, and because I think there are people in the world who are managing, who are doing what I did, which is building meticulous walls around their feelings and calling the walls wisdom, telling themselves that control is the same as peace, that not feeling is the same as being okay. I was not okay, I was organized, those are not the same thing. What I know now, from the far side of all of it, is this. The love was always going to happen. Not because love is inevitable, I don't believe in that. I think love requires choices, requires showing up, requires doing the work, but because everything we were to each other was already the substance of it, was already the living root of it. The feelings I was managing were not something separate from Marcus and me, they were the truest thing about Marcus and me. They were the truth I was refusing to live in because living in it was scary and the cost of being wrong was too high. The cost of being right, it turned out, was everything. Meaning, everything I'd been holding at arm's length was available to me. Meaning, the life I'd been living cautiously could be lived fully. Meaning, the person I'd been performing being fine around every morning in the kitchen, trying not to feel too much, could just be there, could put down the performance and just be there. I know what you might be thinking. I know this story has a shape that seems to require a certain kind of man, a certain kind of revelation, a certain kind of ending. And I want to be honest with you about that. I got lucky. Not everyone in the situation I was in gets this ending. Some people love someone who cannot love them back in the same way, and they have to find a way to live alongside that truth. and that is hard and real, and I don't want to wave it away by telling you that my story is the template. My story is just mine, but the things I learned in it about managing and not managing, about the cost of walls, about what it means to give something the space to grow instead of the shape you've decided it should fit, those things are portable. Those things carry. I've been telling you my version of this story, I want to give you his. I asked Marcus once. We were on a long drive returning from a weekend trip, the kind of conversation that happens most easily in a moving vehicle where you can look out at the road instead of at each other, to tell me what his side of it looked like. When it had started, what it had felt like from inside. He was quiet for a moment, thinking, not avoiding. Then he said, "You know what's weird? I think I knew something was different about how I felt about you before I had any idea what to do with it. Like I'd come home and hear you moving around in the apartment and something in me would just settle, and I thought, that's friendship, that's just what it feels like to have a really good friend. And it was true, it was friendship, I just didn't understand that it was also something else. The thing that threw me was the night you told me something really personal. I don't remember exactly which conversation, there were a lot of them, and I remember thinking afterward that I wanted to know everything about you. Not in the casual way you're interested in a friend's life. He paused. In the way where someone's inner life feels like somewhere you want to spend time. That scared me. I didn't have language for why it scared me, I just knew it didn't fit any category I had. And then I started paying attention to what I felt when I was with you, and the thing I noticed was, I was never performing anything. I was never trying to be a better or smarter or more impressive version of myself. I was just whoever I was, and it was enough. And I had to sit with the fact that I'd never felt that way with a woman I'd dated. I'd always been slightly on, slightly presenting, and with you, from the beginning, never. The shoulder night, I don't remember falling asleep, obviously. But I remember waking up and seeing your face and thinking you'd had a very specific expression and you'd covered it immediately and wondering what it was. And then going to my room and lying in the dark thinking, what was that expression? And eventually understanding that the expression was something I recognized because I was probably making the same one. And then a lot of time of not knowing what to do with that, of trying to put it back in the box. Of going on dates and sitting across from people and thinking, this is fine, this is what I'm supposed to want, this is the shape of my life. And not being able to stop thinking about you. He was quiet for a moment after that, watching the road. I'm glad I stopped trying to put it back in the box, he said. Me too, I said. We drove for a while in the comfortable silence of people who have said enough. I told Priya she'd been right. I told her in person over lunch about 8 months after everything had started, and she listened to the whole thing, which by that point was long, with the patience of a woman who has been waiting to hear this for a very specific reason. When I was done, she said, "What do you want me to say?" "You want to say I told you so." "I've already said it," she said. "That was months ago. I said it via text and I meant it. I'm not going to say it again." "Then what are you going to say?" She looked at me across the table, and there was something in her expression that was warmer and more serious than her usual dry composure. "I'm going to say that you deserve this," she said. "You managed yourself out of good things for a long time. You convinced yourself that being careful was the same as being smart, and then you stopped and look what happened." She picked up her fork. "That's what I'm going to say." I thought about this. "You know what the worst part is?" I said. "What?" "I think I would have kept managing forever if he hadn't said something first." "Probably," she said, without cruelty. "That's why you two were good for each other. You needed someone honest enough to say the thing. He needed someone patient enough to wait for him to understand it." "You've thought about this a lot," I said. "I think about all my friends lives a lot," she said. "It's a gift and a curse." She ate a forkful of her food. "You're happy." "Yeah," I said. The word was too small for what I meant. "Yeah, Priya, I really am." "Good," she said. "Then I'm done being wise about it. Tell me about your project." And we talked about my project. "We still live in the apartment. This surprises people sometimes. Why haven't we moved? Got something bigger, something more?" The honest answer is that neither of us has needed to. The apartment is the place where everything happened, not just the big things but the everyday things, the small accumulation of mornings and dinners, and Tuesday tie nights that make up the actual substance of a life together. Moving would be practical maybe, and we'll do it eventually when it makes sense. But right now the apartment means something that isn't about its square footage or its proximity to things. It means this is where we began. This is where two strangers, one of them hiding something even from himself and the other hiding something entirely from the other, figured out who they were to each other. "There's a couch in the living room. Not the original one that finally gave out at the end of the first year and we replaced it together, which was a small domestic adventure I could write its own chapter about. The new one is better, deeper, more comfortable for falling asleep on. Marcus falls asleep on me on the new couch. He does it on purpose now. He does it the way you do something you have permission for, the way you claim a comfort you've been given and know will still be there tomorrow. I never stopped breathing. I just learned how to do it while it was happening. If you've stayed with me this long, through all 30-something thousand words of this, through all the managing and the not managing, the kitchen floors and the couch nights and the complicated conversations and the ordinary Tuesdays, then I want to say something directly to you. If you are in a place I was in, holding something carefully out of sight, managing yourself through the days, performing fine when you're something other than fine, I want you to know that the management isn't protecting you. I know it feels like protection. I know the walls feel like safety, but they're not keeping the hurt out, they're keeping the light out too. And light is what you need. If you are in a place Marcus was in, sitting with something new about yourself, something that doesn't fit the shape of who you thought you were, something that requires you to revise your self-understanding in a direction you didn't anticipate, I want you to tell you that the revision is not a loss. I know it feels like something is being taken away. It isn't. You are not losing yourself. You are finding a version of yourself that was always there waiting to be seen. It is scary. It should be approached honestly. It deserves the time and space it requires, but it is not the thing that ends who you are, it is the thing that completes it. And if you are in a place where the person you love is straight, or seems to be, or has told you they are, I want to be careful here because I don't want to give you false hope, because sometimes people are exactly what they say they are and the work is learning to love them as a friend and let the rest go. That is hard and it is real and it is worthy work. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the straightness is a conclusion someone reached before they had all the information. Sometimes the head finds the shoulder it belongs on, and the person attached to the head just needs time to understand why. I have one more thing I want to tell you, and it is this. The night Marcus fell asleep on my shoulder, the first time, the accidental time, the time I stopped breathing and stared at the television and managed very hard, there was a moment just before he woke up when I let myself feel it. Just for a second. Just one small window in the wall I'd built, just enough to let it be real. I let myself feel the weight of him, the warmth, the extraordinary ordinary miracle of someone you love being close to you and not knowing it and it being enough anyway just for this one moment just to be there and have this. I let myself feel it and then I put it away. I thought I was being responsible, I thought I was being wise. What I know now is that I was being afraid. And I also know that even that moment, even the managed, closed-off, carefully controlled moment of feeling something I wasn't allowed to feel, even that was something. Even that was love doing what love does, which is insisting on being present regardless of whether you've given it permission. Love doesn't wait for permission. It just waits. And eventually, if you're lucky, if you're brave enough, if the person across from you is brave enough, the waiting ends. And you breathe. It is an ordinary evening. The city is doing its ordinary things outside our windows. The apartment is warm and the coffee table has the remnants of dinner on it, and there is something unremarkable playing on television that neither of us is fully watching. Marcus is asleep on my shoulder. This time he did it on purpose. This time he settled himself in, turned his head, found the right angle, and let out a long, slow breath that said, "Here, this is where I'm staying." I'm breathing normally. I have one hand resting on his arm, which is resting on my knee, which is exactly where it belongs. Outside, somewhere in the city, someone is beginning a story they don't know the ending to yet. Someone is moving into an apartment and meeting a stranger who will turn out to be everything. Someone is managing, carefully, responsibly, all the things they're afraid to feel. I want to find that person and tell them, keep going, hold on. The story is not over at the part where you can't breathe. The story is not over at the part where you sit on a couch in the dark and feel the distance between what you are and what you want like a physical weight. The story goes on. It goes on to kitchens and kitchen floors, to long drives and honest conversations, to the specific weight of someone's head on your shoulder when they've finally stopped needing to be anywhere else. It goes on to ordinary evenings. It goes on to this. Thank you for staying with this story. If it moved you, if it reached something in you, if you recognized yourself anywhere in it, whether you're a Daniel or a Marcus or a Priya standing on the outside watching people figure out what they are to each other, then it did what it was supposed to do. Leave your story in the comments. I read every single one. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.